Right. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to this important session on belonging at work, mental health, and what can we do today. I'm Mamta Pomi, the chair of IAU Women in Astronomy Working Group and advisory committee member of the EAS Diversity and Inclusion Working Group. And I thank you all for joining us to us today to explore how we can contribute to creating a work environment where people of all the genders and of different mental health can still feel valued and supported in their working environment. And we are fortunate today to be joined by two speakers. So we are still waiting for the second speaker, but we already have Dominic Vertue with us. And Dominic is working at the Office of Development of the IAU, and he is going to be talking about mental health issues at workplace. So to give you a quick introduction, Dominic is a social worker and a humanitarian professional with the Office of Astronomy Development of the IAU. He has done his master's in medical social work and a strong background in public health and community-based support. He has worked across various programs which are aimed to empowering vulnerable population and supporting individuals through physical, social, and mental health challenges. And at the OAD, he is, I think, leading a flagship project on astronomy for mental health. And he has been invited already by our group before to give a talk at the EAS 2025. 2020, yeah, 5, yeah. So he's going to talk about mental well-being and how to build a connected working environment and all the healing that we can do through science. So, and our second speaker of today's session is Genevieve Marshall. So we are still waiting for her. Hopefully she'll be joining us soon. So thank you very much for all of you for joining us and for supporting our talk series. And I hand over to Dominic.
Thank you, Mamta. And yeah, welcome everyone. I am trying a new setup, so I need to first see the screen sharing. And there will be lots of icons, but I will navigate through them. So we start off with this one. So to start off with, I was thinking, what would be a good way to introduce the section that Genevieve is covering, the really focus on gender discrimination and where we're currently at. And what I had in mind is these three images. So if you're looking at the finless dolphin, emperor penguin, the white rhino, you might be wondering what this has to do with gender equality. Well, each of these is expected at current rates to be extinct by the year 2100. And at that time, with the current statistics, we'd still be about 30 years away from closing the gap between gender equality. So that means, oh, that went back too fast. So that means that there is work being done, and it's important to notice all the efforts happening. But at the same time, there is a lot more that we could be doing and focusing on. Okay, now I see Genevieve hasn't joined yet, but luckily she did send us a recorded talk. So Genevieve Marshall is the head of fundraising at the IAU, and I will guide you guys through her presentation.
So we can't hear her presentation, I'm sorry.
Okay, then I shared something wrong. Thank you. Let me quickly see. Where is, oh, share sound. That's the one. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Genevieve. I'm head of fundraising for the IAU. I'm based at Leiden Observatory in Pedro Russo's Astronomy and Society group, and I support Professor Willie Benz and the IAU officers with fundraising. Thank you so much to Dom for inviting me to speak with you today, and thank you too to the Women in Astronomy working group for all the tremendous work that they've done in putting on these seminars and working on removing barriers for women in astronomy. It's much appreciated. So you might be thinking, what on earth does fundraising have to do with mental health, finding your peace and so on? Well, I am a fundraiser. I've been doing this for 25 years, working both in fundraising and grant making. I've worked in a range of medical research organizations, but I've also worked a lot on women's female empowerment, women's empowerment, supporting women in domestic violence situations, empowering women to access social and financial education, so financial empowerment, economic empowerment, and also supporting women and girls who wish to pursue a career in video games development. I've also had the good fortune to be a fellow at the Office of Astronomy for Development, and also worked, as I mentioned, in grant making, so also focused a lot on funding these sorts of programs as well, particularly in support of women and girls. My academic background is actually in history and archaeology. I did an interdisciplinary master's in gender, sexuality and society. I graduated in 2022, and it's really wonderful to be here today actually talking about my academic work rather than fundraising, although it is all related, as I'm going to show you in a minute. So just to give you a brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about in the next 20-25 minutes or so, I'll just do some acknowledgements. We'll look at some of the systems and structures and also some of the frameworks in which to analyze this from a feminist theoretical perspective, some practical actions that people are taking globally and within astronomy, and provide you with some further reading as well to take away. So I'd like to begin by thanking all the Black women, women of colour, non-binary people, and non-white, non-Western women and non-binary people around the world who have put so much work and effort into improving the situation for us all globally. Most of these are people are astronomers. Please check out their research, because first and foremost, that is what they are. They are astronomers who are doing a tremendous amount to contribute to the body of astronomy research worldwide, and they have taken on the additional labour of changing the narrative and improving situations in academia for women and non-binary people. Please, a few who are not astronomers, my excellent colleague Cynthia, who is a Falling Walls 2019, Falling Walls Engage 2019 winner. She is at the Office of Astronomy Outreach in Japan. Another colleague, Maggie Rodriguez, who is a Brazilian science journalist. She's currently doing her PhD at the moment in communications, has done some really impactful reporting, science communication reporting. And of course, the very wonderful Joyful, who is at the Office of Astronomy for Development. Joy is actually a particle physicist, and she has done a tremendous amount of work with women in physics in South Africa as well. So thank you all so much. So let's begin at looking at some of the problems that we're seeing in society. Talk around the manosphere, radicalization of boys and young men, particularly online. What's incel culture? We see this from 2014 with Gamergate and Steve Bannon creating this little army of very misogynistic trolls who were then coming out to attack women in the gaming sphere, and also, again, online as social media grew in popularity. We see lots of attack on women in journalism. We see a lot of attacks on women in academia, of course. These will be more familiar examples to you. And I think I would be very remiss if I didn't mention fascism and the rise of fascism. As a historian, this is very well proven and well evidenced. I recommend you checking out the work of some eminent historians who are talking about this. We are seeing exact parallels with 1930s Germany at the moment as well in the language that is being used. And as astronomers who work with AI, we also need to be very mindful about the rise of this techno-fascism in Silicon Valley and the United States, and this very small core group of billionaires who are trying to control this narrative. They are co-opting the work of the academy and manipulating it to with this new narrative, and to control both the labour market and also to control communications. We are, of course, seeing the rise of the far right, particularly in Europe and the West, of course, and this is how they are really expanding their international networks. I think also we do need to mention the fact that women are a part of the problem too. This is a very good article from the University of Queensland, and really looks at how women are upholding these systems of abuse and abuses of power. So we do need to recognise the fact that we have a lot of unlearning to do as well as women, and how much we can actually contribute to shifting this narrative in a positive way rather than adding to the pressures. And all of this is a lot of noise. It's a lot of very loud headlines. It's a lot of things we see on social media. It's a lot of things we're hearing in the news. And it is all done deliberately to try and keep us focused on a certain task and designed to sort of keep us feeling a bit helpless. This has a very big impact on mental health. It's important to remember as we sort of thinking, gosh, there's this sort of barrage of news, and we are living through some really misogynistic attacks on ourselves. We are seeing, the rise in Islamophobia, a rise in anti-Semitism, a rise in, assault on sort of democratic freedoms, at least in Europe and the West. Where is it coming from? Why is it happening? It's very important in our first step to sort of analyze all of this, to realize that it's very, very well funded. There's some examples here from Europe and the US. We also know, of course, things like the Heritage Foundation in the US have been major funders of this, and also people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. So it's a very small group of institutions and individuals who are pushing this narrative for which is very anti-gender. I'm also going to talk now a bit about this report called The Next Wave. This is a EPF, which is a European Union funded organisation. Chief Executive is Neil Datta, and they produced this very interesting report in June, which looks a little bit more about the attacks on reproductive rights and women's bodily autonomy. Now, this is not to pass a judgment call on anyone's personal faith or beliefs. This report really is a really great example and a window into what is currently happening with the attacks on women, LGBTQ, on pretty much everybody which does not follow a Christian nationalist agenda. So it is more looking at the institutions and this sort of small group of billionaires and millionaires who are driving this narrative. So of course we know Russia is very heavily involved in this. We see their huge armies of bots and trolls online. It is also coming through the Russian Orthodox Church, now funding sort of Christian right in Europe. We have a lot of our what were centre right-wing parties were Christian Foundation. Also Catholic philanthropy in Germany and France. So now they are starting to fund a lot more of this anti-gender these anti-gender programs. And of course, as a surprise to nobody who lives in a country that was colonized by Europe, European aristocrats are still very firmly at the center of all this as well. We're also seeing the rise of the tech bros coming into this too. So this is new money coming into these debates, along with the likes of Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, Harry Nielsen and others in the US. Going back to the point on the narrative and who is controlling the narrative, this chap in France has taken over these big media outlets, is aligning them now with social conservative and Catholic leanings, which are then pushing this anti-gender narrative. We already see this through the Barclay Brothers and the Telegraph in the UK. We see this with Rupert Murdoch, of course, The Sun, News Corp, Fox News in the US, Jeff Bezos with Washington Post. These are, our journalism is also under attack, as are our institutions. So it is very, very well funded. 1.18 billion coming into Europe alone. And it can also be linked back to EU state sources. So they're trying to divert taxpayer money too, which the European Parliament, European Union are really focusing on trying to stop. Hungary, of course, as a state actor, has played a big role in this too. And they are becoming increasingly ostracized, but still increasingly pushing funding for these narratives. You also look at this slide as well with the billionaires in the US and how this is funded in the US. They are really taking advantage of a lot of tax structures in the UK to ensure things like Project 2025 are able to come through fruition. So it's all hidden behind this series of what we call donor advised funds, some private foundations, and they've got a lot of these organizations, sort of sub-organizations that are then giving the money to these very sort of anti-establishment, very anti but very sort of anti-everything network. So it's a really important report. I do advise reading it. You can write to EPF. If you say you're from academia, they will send you a copy for free. So please do take a look at it. It's really worth a read, and it is a real eye-opener. And it's important that we look at these kind of conversations, and we look at research coming from different spheres. So Follow the Money in Europe is another great one to look at in terms of tracking parliamentary money and who is funding which parliamentary groups, because it means that we can become more aware, we can make more informed choices and really protect our space a bit better. Now, we also need to consider some of the structures that we are operating under that facilitate these sorts of, I'd say, abuses of power happening. Academic capitalism, thinking more specifically on academia now, of course, academic capitalism, the social and fiscal pressures that universities are now facing, where universities essentially have to become businesses. This is then a push for lower labour costs, which then puts pressure onto adjunct professors, for example, onto tenure track, onto postdocs, PhD candidates. We're also seeing less state investment as well. So is this now for the public good, or is this actually becoming more of a commercial operation where we can take products that are developed in academia and then just translate them into for-profit entities, which then benefits a corporation rather than benefiting society? We also see this sort of knowledge production, this which comes as a result of globalization, which does bring increased access, but this also leads to increased inequality. And if we've got massification, this also thinks about the quality of education that we're providing as well. The institutes which can attract these sorts of students become richer, the poorer institutes become poorer. I think we've got some stark examples in the UK and the US at the moment, for example, and it becomes those who can afford it rather than, again, it being for benefit of society and really uplifting people out of poverty, for example. Conversely, with globalism and globalization and these sort of these policies that have been pursued by governments and international sort of agencies for a very long time, now with this backlash from the far right, we are now seeing this backlash against internationalization, which is impacting on government policy. So universities, which are expected to bring in large amounts of international students to help fund their work, are now suddenly not able to do so because of increased visa restrictions, because of tighter immigration requirements. And this is having a massive impact on finances. We're seeing this in the Netherlands, for example, particularly when the government is also cutting their costs. So it is a direct attack on academia from a financial perspective. There are also, of course, other barriers as well in order to exceed in academia. I think these have been very well explored by the group already, so I don't want to focus on them so much. But obviously, traditional gender roles, childcare, domestic labour, this dismantling of kinship and community. So one of my favourite academics is an anthropologist called Jason Hickel. I've got some reading material of his in my recommended reading, but he's done some very interesting papers on the dismantling of kinship in international development communities, which then prevent women from actually being able to succeed because they are taking on additional burdens such as debt, additional work because they have to provide for their families because of these new systems of capitalism and globalization being put into place. So this also prevents women from succeeding. We are deliberately being cut off from our communities, and this sort of rise of this individualism and this mass consumerism really disconnecting us from our roots, and that's causing a lot of problems. There are, of course, legal restrictions as well. Labour laws, we've mentioned these already. What does this look like for women as well? Sometimes in different countries, it's different for women compared to men. Discrimination, hiring practice, remuneration, I think is well talked about, and we must acknowledge the fact that racism and gender-based violence are still huge problems for women in academia as well. But it is not all doom and gloom. I think what's very important to remember is that we need to start taking back control of these narratives, and we need to start taking back control of our own stories. And one of the ways we can do this is by looking at what colleagues are doing in social sciences and humanities and applying various academic frameworks and lenses to really analyze the sort of this sort of onslaught of misogyny and negativity that we are seeing in every day. Intersectional feminism, I think people will be very familiar with, of course, the very excellent Kimberly Crenshaw, which allows us to look at race, which is a completely artificial social construct, and really start to deconstruct that, but also take into account the fact that not everybody has the same lived experiences. So this includes gender, class, sexuality, health and disability, immigration status, and of course, if you are from the Indigenous community as well, how very different that is compared to somebody who is on occupied land. And really helps us understand these discriminations and injustices in society. So, for example, I am a very white middle-class woman. I went to a private school in the UK. I am university educated, but I also have neurodivergence. I also have I'm a survivor, and I also have these different experiences that mean that I experience the world in a different way compared to somebody who hasn't gone through that. And this helps explain it to people who don't necessarily have this. Also, I would say if you're doing European Union proposals that they are looking for intersectionality now, you need to be able to demonstrate this in proposals that you're doing for a lot of their programs. And you also see governments sort of taking this, and they're using this as a flag to be, oh, look, hey, aren't we wonderfully and inclusive? Less so now with the current rhetoric, but they're doing it wrong. And intersectionality is being used as a way to justify quite bad practice. So just bear that in mind, that sometimes you'll see people saying, oh, look, I'm so intersectional, and really they aren't. It's also very important in using feminist theory that we take a few different critiques, we take a few different frameworks to work through. And I really love transnational feminism because, again, as a white middle class woman who went to a very Christian school, I grew up with certain ideas that were not correct. Now I've had the benefit of hindsight and also the benefit of going through a master's degree to look at these post-colonial, sort of these colonial narratives and how do we decolonize these spaces, particularly decolonizing feminism. We have this sort of this picture of white Western women who are supposed to be going in as saviors in international development. Everybody listening to them, this also plays into white women victimhood, white women tears. I think is something you see quite a lot on social media, quite rightly so, from Black women in America, and how white women are using this to actually give themselves a sense of identity, because this is where they drew their power from under very patriarchal structures. Previously, it's very second wave feminism, and we also see in history as well, and this links back to philanthropy and fundraising, that philanthropy comes out of a lot of it comes out of these sort of Christian missionaries as well. So women in the US, for example, used to go out and set out mission schools because that was all they were allowed to do. So this is where they got a sense of belonging and identity by saying, hey, look, I'm getting my, this is how I'm making myself feel better by setting up schools and trying to educate people in Christianity, taking children from homes and all the rest of it, simply to make themselves feel better because of the patriarchal system that was forced upon them. It's obviously not right, but this is really where they drew their power from. There's a lot of really interesting research around this. And also transnational feminism allows us to look at these imbalances in neoliberal capitalism and globalization as well. So it's a really fascinating framework that I also recommend people to take a look at. And finally, I think the other one to think about is economic empowerment, and which is critical. One of the reasons we've seen so much improvement and we're seeing so many women able to take control of bodily autonomy and take control of themselves, and in terms of reproductive rights and their own health, is because they are earning their own money and they have a lot more power than they used to. We're not reliant on men for money. Now, Professor Linda Scott is an emeritus professor at Syed Business School, Oxford University. She's an economist. She's done a huge amount of work with OECD, UN, and so on. So a very respected economist. I do recommend you read her work. And she looks at the root causes of gender inequality from an economic perspective, because if we aren't able to participate in financially, then we are excluded from society. We are also up against these really entrenched cultural norms and institutional bias. And for example, the Office of Astronomy for Development, the OAD, have a program around astrotourism, and we want to work with rural communities and women in rural communities, but they are excluded from financial systems available to them for a variety of reasons. So how do we improve that access for them so that they can set up their own businesses and they can become entrepreneurs? And of course, as I mentioned already, economic empowerment does lead to bodily autonomy, and that we have the choices that were previously denied to us when we didn't have the financial means to be able to take such choices. So all this knowledge which is being produced in academia and from social sciences and humanities needs to be translated to society. This is done through government policy and also through non-profit organisations, some of these big INGOs as well. So we see UN Women, for example, and also the Empowerment of Women Working Group at the G20 in South Africa, which colleagues at the OAD actually attended, said it was a really wonderful session. That's how this then benefits society and how these frameworks are then being applied to society. And that's also why we're seeing these attacks coming through from the other side to try, who are not so pleased with what they're seeing. It's also very important that we engage men in this conversation as well. So Men Engage Alliance and Equimundo are two big organizations working to shift this balance of the way men view women and the way men view gender to build equality and equity for women. Global Fund for Women also has a mental health program as well. They did that with Kate Spade, who, of course, the designer who unfortunately took her life. So that's worth taking a look at too, to see how some of these partnerships work, particularly in the corporate space. African Women's Development Fund, really fantastic funder. They are funding lots of entrepreneurship programs for women and also really driving female economic empowerment on the continent. Women Deliver is a very big conference. It's every couple of years or so. All the INGOs, so a lot of companies, a lot of government and international agencies come together and do a big presentation on gender, and they look at where they're up to with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Also, we have global health organizations as well. International Association for Women's Mental Health is also for people with lived experience of mental health, for women with lived experience. Worth checking those out. These are also now more moving into the STEM medical research and medical practitioner field as well. But it's worth knowing that these organizations are here, they are working for us, and they are really, really putting up a good fight for us too. So what's happening in astronomy? I think you're all better placed to understand this than me, actually, but I really wanted to touch base on a few things that I think are important to individuals as you are considering where your next moves might be, or how you want to proceed more effectively in your current roles. Mentoring is critical, really important, particularly for early career astronomers. Helps you really figure out where you want to go, obviously, with your research, but also takes care of you as an individual too, and your individual needs, and provides you with really important support. Supernova Foundation and Luma both run really excellent programs, as does Penta by She Speaks Science. That's actually Penta and She Speaks Science have been funded by the OAD in the past. And linked to mentoring is also networking as well. So building your contact base, really sort of discovering what it is you want to do with your life, where do you want to go, what fascinates you obviously about your research, but where you want to be in terms of a person as well. We are more than just work. There's lots of different things we should take into account of our environment too, and that's where frameworks and policies of institutions and the countries you're going to also, I think, matter as well. What's the legal framework in your countries? What legal rights and protections do you have? What is the institute doing about supporting women in the workplace and women in academia? What are senior leadership doing? What are the men doing at these institutions? I think there's a lot of men who are very, very supportive, so it's worth bearing in mind that there are a lot of allies out there supporting women as well. Look to see if they have things like a code of conduct, how that's enforced. Do they have EDI committees? We have both at Leiden. And what kind of, if you do have a problem, what kind of whistleblowing procedures exist? What kind of complaints procedures there are as well? So the useful tools to use, make these policies work to your advantage as well. And finally, linked to networking and also the mentoring, but something that's very, I think, useful when you are working with others is your peers. These are people who will grow with you throughout your career. They are people who you will reconnect with time and again if you continue in academia, of course. And these are people who will also be able to give you feedback and ideas, thoughts, suggestions on where you can go. So this also feeds into the community that you're building around yourself. So do make sure, it's not easy sometimes, especially if you're neurodivergent and perhaps a bit more introverted, but it is really worth trying to make the effort to join some committees, join some clubs, and just stay in touch with your peers so that you know what's going on around, and you can actually leverage that support if you need it as well. And what is the IAU doing about it? We are obviously the global body for professional astronomy. We can't tell institutions what to do. We can't tell countries or governments what to do. But we do put out our recommendations and guidelines and advice and support. The officers take this very seriously. They are very committed to building gender equity in astronomy and making sure that we have safe places for women to be able to practice their science. The big document we have available is our Springboard to Action, which provides recommendations recommendations in this area. So please take this, read it through, and take it to your institutions if necessary, and use this as a tool to advocate for change. We have values, we have code of conduct. We take this very seriously at our meetings and events. People must adhere to a very strict code of conduct in terms of behaviour and harassment. We also have junior members working group as well. Actually, two of the astronomers I mentioned at the start of my presentation, Fatima and Susmita, are co-chairs. If you are interested, please do reach out to them. They're doing really great stuff. Especially for early career researchers on mental health is one of their key areas. So do go and have a chat to them. On the program side, of course, our Office of Astronomy Outreach has a big program for women and girls in astronomy, where we use astronomy as a tool to engage girls in sticking with STEM subjects at school, and really building that pipeline, building that the opportunity for women and girls. And also the OAD has funded a number of programs in this area as well, both in girls' education, but also for Indigenous communities too. Final slide before I go into some reading lists, self-care, and this leads very much more into what Dom is going to be discussing with you for the rest of this talk. But firstly, find your people. As women, we are often cut off from our intuition, and we often mock Gen Z for being vibes-based, but there is very much something about the vibe being off, right? I mean, this is actually a thing. We need to find our intuition, we need to trust it as well. This is actually, you know, it is proven. If something doesn't feel right, don't be with people who are bringing bad energy. Be with people who give you energy. Build your community. This goes back to what I was talking before about your peer networks, but also from outside as well. It's very important that you have things and people outside of academia, particularly if you're in a bad space, to know that this doesn't have to be your entire world. There's so much going on outside of it. Acknowledging self-care and wellness as forms of resistance and resilience as well. I think this is very, very important. You need to realize that this noise and all these communications and, you know, all these these sort of very negative things you're hearing from, you know, Peter Thiel talking about the second coming or whatever. It's, you know, it's designed, this Christo-fascism narrative is designed to make us feel scared. It is designed to make us feel like we don't have control. And self-care and wellness as a form of taking back control as women is hugely important. Activism, it doesn't have to be political either. You know, it's mentoring. It is also lifting up the next generation. If you do want to be on the front line with a placard, you absolutely should, because anger is a valid emotion and you can channel it in a direction that suits you, but also it's not for everybody, and that's absolutely fine. Just remember that if you want to do something which is a form of activism, just helping the people around you is also a form of that too. Don't let yourself become overburdened. Instead, seek out joy, seek out positivity. I'm going to use an example of a friend of mine who's a Black British Nigerian woman, and she said, you know, I'm going to go out and have a picnic today. I'm going to take my really cute basket. It has this really nice, like, frilly lining. I'm going to take my cute little cakes that I've baked. I've got really cute little pies. I've got cute little tea set that I'm going to sit out on my really beautiful floral picnic blanket. You know, very Laura Ashley, if you know, you know. And I'm going to sit down and I'm going to sit in this park, in a beautiful park with all the birds around me, and I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to celebrate being who I am in my skin, and I'm going to ignore all these people who are giving me horrible looks, who don't think that I belong in this space. I think Black people are really wonderful at really celebrating their joy and celebrating who they are. So remember to look out for these moments, not just moments, but really try and live these. This very, very much helps with mental health. Pushing back against the grind, I think this is an obvious one perhaps, but, you know, I work 40 hours a week. I'm not going to be working over the weekend, every weekend, or expected to deliver. I'm not contracted to work more than that. I will do it sometimes because I enjoy what I do, but I'm not going to make that the norm. So you need to set your boundaries very, very firmly with your people around you. Say, hey, you know, actually, that's not allowed. Nobody wants to sort of be, you know, you obviously want to help out, but be mindful that you're not taking on too much. And I think boundaries as well with activism are very important. If you do want to do more of that work, if you do want to do more sort of EDI work, and if you want to do more decolonization, be mindful to set your boundaries so that you don't burn out, because that can happen. mindful, make sure you're asking for help, particularly if you are moving to a new country, you don't know the medical system, you don't know if English is someone's first language, your doctor's first language. Make sure you are prepared. If you know who to go to if you need support and guidance. So in the Netherlands, for example, everyone's English is very good, but having gone through postnatal depression personally myself, and as a neurodivergent person, you go and the cultural experience is very, very different to what you're used to. So you need to be mindful of that, not just the fact that the medical system may be different to what you're used to, but you may need support. You may need an advocate. You need to take somebody with you to lend you support, or a translator or something. These are things that we need to think about when we are working in different countries. And of course, if you need help as well, ask the people around you too. You should be able to go to your supervisor. You should be able to go to your institute director. You should be able to go to your friends and family. Don't suffer in silence. That's one of the worst things that you can do, because it will pass. That's something I sometimes say a lot to myself is, but it will pass. I just really need some extra help right now to get me through it. So you're not alone. Another way of being able to embrace this is also looking at Indigenous cultures, their forms of care as well. So historically, as white women from the UK, we were literally severed off from our culture when the Romans invaded, and what was Britain's and British culture actually was completely decimated by the Romans and by the early Christians in a deliberate attack to wipe out Celtic the Celtic culture. So this is very well documented in history, and as a result, women are left sort of adrift. Like, we don't really have a sense of connection to our land. We don't really have a sense of connection to our nature. So there are some really great people doing work in this space in Europe. Dr. Gina Maffei is one. I recommend you look her up. She's doing tremendous work on how do we reconnect. And we can also, appreciate and learn from Indigenous cultures who already have some really wonderful practices. So another personal anecdote, my grandmother is actually from Macau. So I spent quite a long time growing up in Singapore as well. So I am really a product of the empire, learning from the Chinese culture. My Chinese culture, the Chinese side of my family, has also really helped me reconnect with what's going on in my life and keep me grounded and develop my sense of self. Limit your social media time. Again, going back to this noise, and again, thinking about who is controlling it, who's controlling these narratives. Of course, with TikTok, China as well, we mentioned earlier, some of the countries, China is obviously controlling things through TikTok too. Just be mindful of that. Again, it's about being mindful. You don't need to be on social media all the time. Set yourself boundaries, educate your algorithm as well. Be very clear on what you do and don't want to see. Make sure you're disciplined in sticking to that and getting rid of videos that do not serve you, video content that does not serve you, and really set boundaries in your life. Make sure that you set time for all of these things, like exploring, having fun, celebrating joy, celebrating other people, celebrating community, and rebuilding community. I keep coming to this point, is that as individuals, we really can't achieve much, but as a community, this is when we really can just put back, resist, and build resilience and celebrate, because that's what the attack is. They're trying to stop us from building community. So make sure that you give yourself the time and space and grace. Be kind to yourself. It is sometimes a really hard world out there. Academia is not always easy. It can be very pressured. Just make sure that you acknowledge this, and that you take time out to thank yourself for all that you've done, and thank your brain and body for taking you this far. You're doing a great job. So I'm just going to leave you with some links here, which Uncharitable is from a friend of mine. She's again another Black British Nigerian woman who set up an organisation which looks at resistance and decolonising narratives in the non-profit space. But there's also a lot of papers there from academics in decolonisation, particularly Global South academics. So I really recommend having looked through some of those, and Learning for Justice and Stanford Student Affairs just talk a little bit more about self-care. How do you do this if we are up against it, and also how do you obviously take care of yourself in academia too. And finally, this slide and the next slide just have some reading for you. If we are informed, if we know what's going on around us, then we can make more informed choices in our lives. Please do reach out to colleagues in humanities and social sciences to help you understand and make sense of some of the challenges that you might be going through at the moment. Chances are that research is either ongoing or has already been done, and there's some really great debate going on in that space already. it's important that we band together as an academic community, and we can combine forces. I think there's some really cool interdisciplinary work that's going on at the moment. So I think astronomy is really good at this, and the IAU, of course, we have lots of different commissions, so do check those out as well to see if some of those are of interest, particularly in the cultural heritage side. But enjoy reading. It's nice to finally be able to share some of these with people. Just a very quick note on this slide that there is a publication here from the OAD, so my colleagues there, Kevin, Ram, and Vanessa, who's now the science director at the ISC. Just please do take a look out for the publications that are coming out from the OAD. I think they've recently had small publications in Nature. Sorry, Dom can probably inform on this better than me. But we do have some dedicated discussions in this on astronomy as well as sort of more broadly across humanities and social science. So please do check that out. And finally, thank you so much for your time. And do let me know if there are any questions or thoughts that you have on the presentation. Many thanks, and I'll hand over to Dom.
Okay, I think that was an amazing share. I was going to open for questions, but I think you are welcome to get in touch with Genevieve. She is very open to engaging with people on the topic, very easy to get hold of, and she would be happy to engage. So instead, what I think I'm going to do is, if there's just one or two people that would like to comment on Jen's talk before we move on to the mental health specific aspect of gender discrimination.
Yes, maybe I just wanted to say that it was so refreshing to hear this kind of positive affirmation and reminder that we need to take control back of our time and our lives, and that we are so much more than work. Because I feel like in academia, this is a discourse that we don't hear enough. And as she was explaining, that we tend to hear the opposites. And it's very, very important that we have this spaces where we can have this other discourse, which I think is much better for our mental and physical health. So yeah, thank you so much for everything.
Oh, pleasure. I see Genevieve has just joined. So I'm going to see Jen. If you are willing to unmute, they have just finished your section and you actually made it perfectly in time for questions.
Just in time. Gosh, I'm so sorry, everyone. I had to take my daughter to a hospital appointment and it ran over and everything else. So my apologies, I'm so late. So I'm very glad I pre-recorded. Thank you so much for having us here today and inviting me. And yeah, if there's any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Right, so just to introduce, that's Genevieve Marshall. We heard her. It was an excellent talk, and she's head of the fundraising of the IAU. Okay, so if you have any projects to build with her, get in contact with her, because she is having a lot of experience in raising funds to especially support women and young girls in STEM. Okay, any further questions for her?
I have a question, if I may, especially if you mentioned fundraising. And do you have any experience? So also in your talk, I think you briefly touched upon this, is that a lot of this work is sort of done on a best effort basis or sort of even voluntary private time basis. And at my university, we do actually have a diversity group and we get some time for it. But I think as equality representative, I have a role of 20% of my time. And if that's nice. But if you want to do this work properly, you need significantly more than that. Do you have any experience in raising funds or grants that? Because I mean, I'm used to applying for scientific grants, but I could also envision writing a proposal to fund these activities for 3 or 4 years or something like that. Do you have any experience in that?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. It's a good one. It really depends on the angle you're coming at. So we could look at NOVA as an example, where NOVA actually released funding to fund, I think Tana was in post for a couple of years or so. So they actually created a post for an EDI officer to come in and look at some of these frameworks, and also worked with on a consultancy basis as well. So there's a number of different ways you can attract it. what foundations want to do is seed fund something. They're not going to fund something in perpetuity. So I think that's also a bit where that problem lies. Otherwise, you're continually chasing this grant cycle funding. It's no different really to science funding, unfortunately. But what foundation money will do is sort of prime that landscape for you to allow you to have those conversations and then leverage much more longer term support, particularly from policy as well, because that's really where you're going to see much more longer term funding. Non-profit, so that's obviously in a sort of a university space. So it is a lot of, as you probably know, advocacy work, lobbying work. You really are trying to force policies, and when the policy is in place, then usually it has to come with some funding. So that's one route, and I think a lot of observatories, I know there's a lot of conversations going around this, and you can draw parallels with the climate movement, climate action movement as well. And I know A4E have been doing, Astronomers for Planet Earth have been having similar conversations for climate action. So you can follow a similar template to that. Where non-profits get their money from, so yeah, charities charities in the UK and the US, for example, their funding comes from in a different way. So that usually comes from the general public. And one thing we see a lot now happening in STEM and science is crowdfunding. So public engagement is actually a really good example. And we're seeing examples in the Netherlands now of scientists and public engagement, focus on public engagement, crowdfunding for their public engagement work. And that's a model that's going really well. I think we recently had one scientist at Leiden who raised €100,000 for their work. And again, this allows you to sort of introduce to people this broader concept. It's not easy, it's a grind, especially because gender equity work is one of the least funded. Foundations are still not funded. I think it's only around 4% of all funding goes to, in Europe, sorry, I can only talk from a European perspective, but in Europe, yeah, it's around 4% of, even less, I think, goes towards gender equity. So it's still a very underfunded movement in general. So that's why keeping the pressure on and raising awareness, both with general public and within your own communities, is really important, because I think, yeah, people understand it needs to be funded. So I'd also advise looking at partnership working as well with non-profit organizations who are in this space. Collaboration is always better as well. But to get that longer term funding, ultimately it has to come from policy and sort of people mandating this in terms of proper employment contracts, permanent and so on. So.
Right. So I just have a quick question for you. What about IAU? Do they have a plan to provide some funds for STEM-related activities?
That's definitely a question for the officers. So I'm not involved, obviously, in the budget for the IAU. I just raise money for what they asked me to do. But it's a stream that is across all the offices. So, of course, as I mentioned, the Office of Astronomy Outreach, so our colleagues in Tokyo already do a big program for women and girls in STEM. So that's something, a very big piece of work for us as well. The IAU officers, obviously, we have our Springboard to Action, which is our policy. And so that's, but if that's sort of a longer term policy discussion, then that's definitely something to raise with the IAU officers. But at the moment, that work is delivered either through sort of best practice around scientific meetings and with the OAD and the OAO predominantly as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to this, we have been asking funds to the executive committee of the IAU over the last 3 years. And finally, this year, we did get a very small, modest amount. And that is to really support and recognize the STEM ambassadors who are supporting the careers and making working environment a bit better. So finally, we managed to get this funding. Yeah. That's just for the medals. So we will be giving medals to people for the next 10 years for their devoted work that they are doing. So thanks.
That's amazing. I think I saw that just announced as well, which is really terrific. So yeah, this is where sort of that, it takes time, but that long-term advocacy and policy work does start to pay off. It is a long-term game, definitely. So yes, congratulations to the winner.
Yeah, I mean, so it took a lot of time from our working group, almost last 3 years. So all the volunteers who have been working without funds, of course. But thanks to their devoted, efforts, as well as all the speakers who have been putting their energies exactly like we are doing today. That's why I think we managed to create this kind of awareness and the importance for such kind of activities, why they should be supported. And so it has happened. I mean, the IAU is existing since more than 100 years now, but that's the first time in the history of IAU that it has happened. So thanks to everybody for your efforts. Yes, Mathis has a question, I guess.
So sort of also related to this, is there any work done at the IAU or the EAS to sort of shift the norms of what is meriting in academia? You know, now if you do work, just to go to the extreme, the only thing that counts is what kind of papers you've published and whether you've had invited scientific talks. So aside of even if I would get the funding, you know, if you the more time you spend with contributing to a work environment, gender equity and stuff like this, you'll, if you want to do it in a sustainable way, you'll spend less time doing scientific research. And even if you're a person who doesn't care about climbing the academic career, which I think there are more people who don't care about that than one would think, you might actually end up being punished um, uh, for not producing enough work, you know, because if in different appraisal situations, the fact that you might have contributed to enabling great science does not count as much as actually doing mediocre science, I would even say. So is there any, because I think in academia, it's sort of important that we shift the norms from a very narrow view on what is contributing to academia worth and sort of broaden this and see like, it's also about enabling science, supporting people who do science, and then diversity is a very fundamental natural part of that. Is there any work at the IAU or EAS to actually discuss the norms that we have?
Yeah, so just to add to this, so that was one main reason why I have started and I've put in so much of time. And that's the reason why we came up with the STEM Ambassador Recognition Award. It was really to recognize the work of these individuals who are really spending a lot of their time, energy, who may also get punished and threatened. Let's not forget that, because we do get all sorts of emails which says, okay, what you're doing may not be very good for you and for your career and etc. So it is really for that reason that we came up with this program of STEM Ambassador Award to bring up the real problems and the challenges that we face and the people who are really devoting their time, and sometimes even they are getting into all sorts of legal problems and just to support their colleagues, you know, who are in problem. And so it was to really recognize and appreciate their efforts, which just gets unnoticed and sometimes even get punished in a harsh way. And that may even not only spoil their career, but also their mental health, both. And who is to be blamed for that? That's the big question to ask. So that's the reason why we started it. And thankfully it has worked. And so in the next years, we have already announced five winners for this year. But we also have started this medal. So the medal will really go to someone who has spent a lot of time and whose time has not been accounted anywhere. So as you're talking about, you know, the merits in academia, so this is the medal for that. But I think we need to do a bit more than that. So we have also come up with this poster of gender balance champions in astronomy. And these gender balance champions are all for all the genders who have contributed to this effort, so that we have this list of members whom we know how they have spent their time doing this kind of voluntary work, and which should be counted as a service to the community. It should be similar to support scientist job. When you do a support scientist work in the observatory and taking care of the instruments, it's the same thing. Instead of instrument, you're taking care of the people who are running the instruments and who are needed for that. So we are doing it, and we are putting this in our gender equity plan. So, but I don't know if it's more than that, if one can do, but that's what is the effort from our side.
I would also, I can't speak for EAS, Dom, I don't know if you have come across this through, I know you've done presentations with EAS in the past, but I'd also advise reaching out to the other working group, which Dr. Kelly Blumenthal is co-chair of at the IAU, which is the equity, the inclusion? I can't remember the full name now, sorry, I'll put it in chat. But it's also worth reaching out to them as well, because again, this sort of combined community effort is what is going to see change.
Yes, Barbara has a question, I suppose.
Yeah, I had just one last quick question. So on another subject, you mentioned neurodivergence at some point, and I think this is also like a new inclusivity domain that is raising awareness right now, and I think we're really not prepared for it on both sides, because diagnostics are still very difficult to get. Sometimes they're very expensive. So as a society as a whole, it's very difficult to get to that. And science tends to attract more neurodivergent people than other domains. So even for people who are neurotypical, they realize that they have to interact with neurodivergent people and that it's getting very difficult. And sometimes it can get in the way of just working together. So I don't know if you had any more resources about this subject that we could use.
Dom, is that something you want to answer? Because I'm just looking up the working group that would be the best place, I think, to direct that question to. But Dom is obviously a professional, so.
Yeah, I would think practically the working group is a very good place to reach out to, because they can say what's currently active and running. Because I think a lot of it is going to, unfortunately, still at the moment come down to the individual. And that's also something that we'll be touching on in the next section, is how we're talking about these skills, we're talking about the self-care, and that is great, but that is not a substitution for the change that needs to happen within the organizations. So as much as we are equipping ourselves and we're trying to advocate for others to be cared for and considered and treated equally, it is really a bigger challenge that needs to see an entire organizational shift. So yeah, I think the working groups would be the most productive way to see where they're at and what is currently running. Okay, and yeah, we'll have more question and engagement sessions later. So if questions come up, you're also welcome to keep those. And yeah, I think so. Moving over into the mental health section, yeah, I think it's a good place to start, is that focus on, I really advocate self-care and acknowledging the need of your own mental health, because even as individuals, it's often easier to give care to your work, give care to your colleagues, people around you, your family. But the self-care is the foundation. Otherwise, you easily run into a situation where you're burned out and you're unable to have capacity to give anymore. And especially when talking about the topic of gender discrimination in the workplace, unfortunately, it does hit women a lot more. And we know this from all the statistics over the last 40 years, that women are more affected by mental health concerns, and also they carry a lot more of the burden. So let me screen share. I have a little Kahoots question for us that I need to start. So this one is just to get an idea, for those that are willing to complete it, to get an idea of the current stress level before we head into our session talking about the mental health impact at the workplace, and then offering some small skills. So I'll wait until there's about at least 2 more participants, and then we'll do the little stress scale indicator. While we're getting this ready, I've been introduced. So my experience is really in social work, largely medical setting, and then guiding people through various transitions from disability, loss, and then also thriving, how to actually cope with the challenges that they're facing. And then in my personal capacity, I've also constantly been involved with entrepreneurs, businesses, and various individuals that, as we all know, you constantly have these challenges that you face, and often we just need that extra step to help us get to a positive outcome. So we've got 4 people in. Let's start this one up, and you can get a little indication of current stress. Okay. I think we only had 5 people, so I'm going to give it about 4 more seconds and then see the results. Okay. Oh, so we have quite a broad a broad spectrum. We've got calm and then a bit overwhelmed. That is actually quite a nice spread to work with. So let me go to my slides. So first off, a lot of what we'll be covering is based on acceptance and commitment therapy, and we'll dive more into the details later. But a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy builds on this awareness of what is happening. And one way to build that awareness is through meditation. So I would like to share a meditation with those that are willing. It's completely optional. It's also a good chance. We've been sitting for a while. So those that do not want to be part of it, they can just stretch, move around, or they can go grab a refreshment. We'll take around about 8 to 10 minutes. So don't feel pressured into joining. But I will give the disclosure. So the meditation isn't in an esoteric sense. It is really just a grounding and trying to become more aware of what is actually happening in your body. It is a skill that if you do get comfortable with it and you're willing to practice it, it does allow you to more actively see how your body experiences the stress, the traumas, the critique, the everything that is happening. And it allows you to attentively decide how you want to interact with that and how you want to shift your focus and your attention. So, with that being said, for those that are willing to join into this, I will begin. So, wherever you are, for those joining, allow yourself to settle into a comfortable posture. That can be sitting in your chair, standing, lying down if that feels best. And gently close your eyes or lower your gaze. Then taking in a slow breath, letting it out fully. Notice that you are here. Give yourself permission to pause for a moment. Bringing attention to where your body meets the ground or the chair you're sitting on. Feel the weight of your body being supported. Noticing your feet. Sense the contact they make with the floor. Noticing your hands resting, not needing to do anything right now. Throughout this short meditation, if your mind begins to wander, that is completely natural. Gently guide it back to this sense of being supported. Now, let's take a moment to bring attention to our breathing. There's no need to change it. Simply noticing it. The rise as you breathe in and the fall as you breathe out. Breathing breath after breath. The thoughts and feelings coming up. Acknowledge them kindly. And then I invite you to focus back onto the breath. We're going to gently scan through our body. So bring awareness to the crown of your head, your forehead, your eyes. You might notice some tension. Simply acknowledge the tension. There's nothing to fix. We're just noticing right now. We're moving further down to the jaw, the throat, and the shoulders. If you feel any tension in your shoulders, you can soften them, even if just a little. Bringing awareness further down each arm into the hands and the fingertips. Now the chest. Feeling your breath moving in and out. We move down to the belly, noticing any sensations we might have. And we move down to the hips, the pelvis, the legs, the knees, ankles, and feet. And with this, we've done a short scan through our whole body. So with your whole body, head to toe, you can hold this experience gently. Now, as we end, we can take one breath in and notice it moving in, releasing it slowly. And I want you to just take a notice of the state of your body, the thoughts you might have right now. And then when you're ready, you can begin to wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers, and slowly lift up your eyes or open them if they were closed. And as we go through the rest of the session, I encourage you to try and keep this awareness that you had of the experiences within your body, being steady, present, and connected. So thank you, everyone. So for my session, I really wanted to look at these inequalities and how they impact on mental health. A lot of the impacts are very obvious, but I wanted to go through some of the dynamics behind it and how our usual ways of trying to solve problems and doing things might actually be setting us up for later burnout and mental health fallouts. Then we'll be looking at 3 micro skills based on acceptance and commitment therapy work. They're small skills that anyone can use. And I'm also fully aware that each of us is an individual with a lived experience. So some of them might be more useful or less useful. But throughout, I will remind everyone to approach this as an experiment with yourself being the N of 1. When we're approaching our self-care, you would have already tried a lot of things. And if there's an issue that you're still facing, it's likely that you've tried various ways to resolve this problem. So I would encourage you to try these skills as an experiment to see if this different approach is something that is useful for the challenge that you are facing. And then right at the end, we'll have a short 1-slide section just on a pledge. That will really just be an encouragement for what is a practical step, thing that you can do going out of this meeting. I actually put it for this week, but I feel like it's already the end of the week, so maybe it is for until the next Friday. So I would like to start off with discussing briefly the locus of control and how that influences on gender. Now, the locus of control broadly speaks about how we interpret things happening in our world, the situations we're in. Is it in our control or out of our control? And on average, research shows that women tend to have more external locus of control than men. It means that they're more likely to believe that they are governed by external forces such as luck, fate, or powerful others rather than their own actions. The difference is modest and is context dependent, shaped by factors like age, culture, education, and the domain being measured such as health, work, or family, because the locus of control can be fluid and change in different contexts. So some studies then found strong correlations, some weaker, but there was definitely, on average, a more external locus of control for women. Now, the distinction matters because for those with an external locus of control, the external locus of control is associated with greater stress, less proactive coping and self-care, and a higher risk of mental health systems. While the inner control is linked with resilience, higher self-esteem, and problem-focused coping. So women who lean towards external locus of control often cope through emotion-focused strategies such as seeking social support, venting, or reinterpreting situations. Now, this could be positive and negative, and we'll go over why. They might also invest in relational solutions, lean on community. The risk is in seeking these external situations and in reinterpreting the situation, it can easily fall into rumination and self-blame, especially if structural constraints and the structural issues persist. So in the context of gender discrimination, these dynamics do matter. When women encounter systematic barriers such as unequal pay, biased promotion practices, harassment, the sense that the outcome is externally controlled is reinforced. And this external orientation combined with discrimination stressors can heighten the risk of anxiety, burnout, depression, especially if coping remains focused on emotion rather than structural change. So building organizational cultures that restore agency and fairness and support women in developing flexible coping repertoires may buffer the mental health impact of the persistent gender inequalities. But it is also often used, as we said, as an easy way out, rather equipping the individual so that the structure of the organization doesn't change. Now, why is belonging important? So the locus of control, we mentioned briefly, it is flexible. But a lot of the outcome is people who generally try and seek some support from their community, from those around them. And when we talk about belonging isn't optional. It's psychologists Baumeister and Leary showed almost 30 years ago already that humans have a fundamental need to belong. When our sense of belonging frays, there's a marked decrease in health. Anxiety rises, depression deepens, burnout accelerates. So let me introduce you to Abby. So this is a fictitious name for a person that I've worked with before. Abby is a mid-level engineer, up at 6, getting her kids ready, rushes to work, logs into a meeting. She's been planning and working on this meeting all of the weekend, got many ideas ready. She gets there, it's finally her turn, she shares the idea. And there's silence. Moments later, someone else mentions her idea, only to be the credit to be given to them. Later, she discovers a male colleague with no caregiving duties earns more for the same role. At 5, she leaves to go fetch her children, and at 10, she's back online trying to catch up and reply to some emails. At the same time, promotions come around. The colleague without other commitments gets promoted. The reason cited is he shows up more. He's a team player. He engages within the culture. Weeks pass. She sleeps badly. She grows irritable. She withdraws from her colleagues. Soon, the one question that she keeps asking herself, do I even belong here? Unfortunately, this isn't an unusual situation. These are the psychosocial risks. So the World Health Organization, International Labour Organization, all of these point towards unfair pay, role ambiguity, harassment, and excessive workloads. At the very beginning, I showed that picture of the animals that would be extinct by the year 2100. And this is where it links in. Currently, the World Economic Report shows a gender parity of about 68.8%. And there is progress being done. But if we keep it at this pace, it would take 123 years to close that gap. And the answers are clear. We need to fix the work design. We need a culture that creates supportive environments. And we need to not focus on training the individuals to be more resilient, but in changing the organization. I think I'm going to pause here first before we move into skills to ask if there's any questions on the bias and locus of control so far. Okay, just doing a quick scan. I don't see any hands. Okay, perfect.
I mean, I can just say something from my own experience because, as you said, the lady, she has to drop her children at 7 at the school, so she gets up at 6, and then she has to leave at 5 and collect them, and then get into all this meeting stuff and keep on working late nights, which I have done for several years now, more than 20 years, and I continue to do so even now. But I always remember that when my children were born, at that point, because then they couldn't stay out for 8 hours in a day because they were babies. So at that point, people used to make comments, oh, we never see you. We don't see you enough. But nobody ever asked, are you paid to the number of hours you should be spending there? And now that you are having two babies to take care of, do you have any other support system so that you could take care of them? Because they are fragile, right? They need more attention and physical help and support than anybody else. But nobody ever asked that. Even women, they never asked. Forget about men. So so this is something which is very biased. It's biased towards mothers, maybe. And then, but people were very good in noting, and whether men or women, to say that, oh, she was never there. She was never there. So neither their work contracts or their working hours are being, looked at before such comments are passed, and neither are their physical obligations and commitments are being looked at before such comments are made. But people start to make this kind of mindset, and then they just pass it to everybody and they influence everybody. But what I don't understand is how come they don't try to correlate it with their own life experiences, which they have had. I mean, they also went through all this. So how come they don't correlate to that? So I don't know would you like to say about that, but that's very common.
It is. It's very common. And although it's not something I like to share, I was very much a perpetrator of that. Before I was a stay-at-home dad for a couple of years, having to do all of the caregiving and trying to balance out getting different roles, having to show that even though I can only be there a few hours, I can still do the work. I do think society has set it up that it's very easy to go into these automatic biases. And yeah, I think that actually it fits in very well because we're going to be talking a bit about bias now. And it is exactly that. It is the roles are quite clear. But then whenever it becomes to hiring, firing, promoting, then suddenly it's the considerations of all these things that are outside of your actual work function that come into play. And those are the type of things that are extremely important in organizations to look at in the work culture and in activities as when you're setting up teams of if people look from the outside, what would they see? Because those are the things that actually show how inclusive the environment is. So thank you. Okay, so let me then move back to the slide. So yes, our unconscious bias. So let me first find myself again. Before we go through the bias slide, if we are comfortable closing our eyes or even just imagining, I'm going to ask you 3 scenarios, and I want you to just be aware of what comes to mind. So the first is a Fortune 500 CEO walking onto a stage. The second is a Nobel Prize laureate giving a speech. And the third is a happy couple walking past. Now, having imagined these scenarios very briefly, it's a quick indication of what your automatic bias might be. So if you're thinking of the Fortune 500 CEO and the Nobel Prize laureate, what was their race? What was their gender? And if you're thinking of the happy couple that was walking past, was it a man and woman? Was it 2 men, 2 women? And there's nothing wrong with whatever you pictured. It is just to show that that is the bias. Whatever it was, that is the bias that you bring into how you see the world. So the bias is how our brain plays a role in reinforcing the system of exclusion. Valerie Alexander had a very nice TED talk on this, where she goes over how our brain is constantly trying to keep us safe. It looks for patterns and it matches what feels familiar, because that is faster, it takes less resources in the body, and it keeps us safe. But that is only when you're talking about survival. When we're talking about inclusion, it actually causes a lot of pain. So when something or someone doesn't match this pattern, it creates a discomfort. That discomfort drives a bias in us. It's a biological bias that kicks in. It's an automatic process that we can sometimes use to treat people unfairly without even noticing. Another piece to it is that sometimes what looks like bias or withdrawal is actually a trauma response. So a trauma response is the body and mind's automatic reaction to a perceived threat. It often carries over from past trauma, and it involves what we call a fight, freeze, or fawn response. The response can be physical, emotional, or behavioral, and they are designed to keep us and help us survive a dangerous situation. This is different from what psychologists call automatic negative thoughts, or ANTs. The automatic negative thoughts are patterns of negative thinking, while a trauma response is a psychological and a physiological reaction in the body. Both can show up at work, and they're not quite the same. But why does this matter for our focus on belonging and mental health? Because when people are facing discrimination, when people feel unheard, they feel excluded, their body can interpret that feeling as a threat. The fight response might look like anger. The flight response might look like withdrawal or silence. Freeze can show up as shutting down in meetings. And fawn might look like overcompliance or people pleasing. These are not personality flaws, but survival strategies. And this is where ACT starts coming in. So the acceptance and commitment therapy. Because in ACT, it's learning that mindfulness, learning that skill to open up, to make space for the difficult feelings rather than letting them be automatically processed, rather than pushing them away. It helps you to be present, notice the thoughts, the sensations, without letting them control you. And then later, when put into practice, it helps you to focus on what matters for you, taking small actions guided by your values. And it could be actions such as fairness, inclusion. And this is how you can notice when bias is showing up. It is when you give yourself that space to pause, to be mindful. You can see what is being triggered, and then you can choose the behavior that you want to show. So when we amplify someone's voice in a meeting, when we pause and redirect credit, when we create clarity and fairness, not only do we counter bias, but we also create this setting where we allow other people's nervous system to be signaled that this is a safe space. And it is that safety that is the foundation for the mental health and connection within that organization. So let's talk a bit about ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. It's the framework that we're going to be basing what we're doing on today. It generally is used not just as a therapy. So it's acceptance and commitment therapy, but the therapy part often throws people off. It's not just for clinical settings. It's a skill. It's backed by decades of research, and it's been helping people to become more what we call psychologically flexible. Basically, what that means is it's very well proven skills that allow you to become aware of what you're feeling and experiencing and deciding how do you want to react to that. So at its heart, ACT teaches 6 core skills, but for today, we're going to cluster them into 3 moves, the ones titles here: Open Up, Being Present, and the one I cut off says Doing What Matters. So with the Open Up, it's learning to make room for those difficult challenges, emotions, feelings, instead of fighting them. Now, I do have to say, it is easy to confuse acceptance with accepting the situation. But that is not what we're talking about when we're talking about acceptance here. We're talking about you accepting that the feeling is real, the challenge is real, whatever it might be. And you're accepting that it is a feeling that you're carrying with you, but you're not condoning that feeling. So it's accepting it, being aware, and saying, I notice that I'm feeling it, so I can choose the next step. We're talking about being present. It's learning to pay attention to the current moment, to notice your thoughts and feelings without being dragged around by them. This is called in ACT, it's the diffusion, so separating yourself from the thought, being able to realize those biases, being able to realize that things that you're experiencing, it is a thought, it's not necessarily a truth. And then the doing what matters is, ACT is based a lot about making sense of what are your values. And values here are things that you strive for, but it is something that you would never be able to reach. It's almost like an intangible. So fairness and equality would be ones. There would always be ways to improve, be more fair, better equality. But people also you have your individual values, your corporate values, your professional, your work values. And the more clarity you have on your values, it helps you to structure your behavior to reach those. So why is this useful? In the modern workspace, we have stress, bias. I mean, you saw the talk of the active pressures coming from both sides, one for equality, one for inequality. So these are not challenges that are going away overnight. Telling people to just be positive and resilient also isn't enough. So ACT gives us an alternative. It's some practical skills to help us to respond flexibly and then act based on our values, even if the conditions are tough. And the research shows that it works. It's been tested in workplaces, schools, hospital, military groups, and across the board. It is useful in reducing stress, lowering burnout, improving engagement, and increasing well-being. It's been described that psychological flexibility is the single best predictor of mental health across various contexts. So when we're using ACT, we're not talking about the therapy in the traditional sense. We're talking about a science-based toolkit that anyone can learn, and at its core helps us to pause, notice, and choose the behaviors that we want to create and the culture of belonging. So let's move into, oh, I missed a slide. Let's move into our first skill. So this one is the opening up. It's the making the room for hard feelings. So like I said, acceptance is a slippery word. You hear it, you think it means giving up, resigning yourself to the difficulty. But in ACT, it means you make room. I like the metaphor that they came up with that is often used. It is passengers driving a car. You are the driver. You're in a car. You can picture your challenge, your emotions, the difficulties that you're going through as the passengers. They jump in the car, and depending on the severity, they might have very loud voices. They could be telling you, go this way, go that way. They're all demanding attention. But you are the driver. You're the one that holds the wheel. You're the one that can decide where are we going, regardless of the directions and things that they might be shouting out. So take a moment and just imagine if you had to get into a car right now with your emotions, what would be some of the emotions in the car with you? Now, for those that have pictured an emotion in the car with them, an important part of ACT is also how we use language. Allowing yourself to purposefully say, I notice instead of I am, actually seems small, especially when writing it down. But to your brain, it is a world of difference apart. The saying, I am angry or frustrated, or I am not worth it, or whatever it might be, fuses you with that. It gives you no space to move. It overwrites any attempt at changing the situation. The simple act of telling yourself, even if it is softly or verbally or just imagining in your mind, instead of I am the emotion, you say, I notice I feel the emotion, or I can see I am looking at the emotion. That small distance. So I encourage those that are willing, think of the emotion, tell yourself, I notice, I feel the emotion that you're looking at. And then just take a deep breath. And that's it. That is the entire activity of the passengers in the car. It's about that tiny bit of space. So for those who did the activity, notice in yourself, do you feel any different towards the emotion, towards that feeling? And later we can maybe chat about that during the engagement session. Now, when we open up, when you have that little bit of space, you stop fighting yourself. You're freer to act according to your value. And I think actually, I might take a small pause here and see if anyone is willing to share in the chat. Where is my chat? Yeah, if anyone can share in the chat, just type maybe if you did notice any difference between the feeling initially imagining it in the car and then having rephrased it as you notice the feeling or you're seeing the feeling. So I'll just give about 30 seconds if anyone is willing to share into the chat. Okay, thank you, Maura. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Genevieve and Erin. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Beautiful. Oh, thank you, everyone. Okay. So our next one really looks at the bias, our autopilot that we employ most of the day. It's the being present. So this one is a very difficult one because it is so contingent on also your state at any point. How calm are you? How are you feeling? Have you rested well? All of those things play in. The more tired you are, the more stressed you are, your brain will naturally divert all the resources to get you through the day. So a prerequisite almost for the being present is just being aware of, are you in a situation or a space at work, in your personal life, where you're able to take time for yourself and just give yourself these moments to get to a space where you're able to engage positively with your work, with your family, friends, and the world around you. So when we're talking about being present, your bias is on autopilot. So someone might be talking and you can easily, without even thinking about it, have thoughts come up like, she's too assertive, he's not leadership material. And then here's the little trick, similar as last time where the language changes it. If you notice you're having a lot of these thoughts, especially if it's thoughts that are making you feel resigned or angry or more combative towards this person, or like you actually don't want to be in that situation. Once you notice that, you can try change the language. Again, you can put in the, I'm having the thought that she's too aggressive, or he's not leadership material, or he's too assertive. It again provides you with that diffusion, that little bit of space. And then you combine this with a stop. So the stop is once you become aware of what is happening, you're taking a breath to create that moment of space. You're adding the language in that you're having the thought instead of letting your autopilot write the language for you. And then you can proceed guided by your values. And well, honestly, you can proceed then however you like. You can choose to not follow your values, but it gives you the space to actually make a choice instead of just being guided by your biology and what is happening currently within you. So picture a scene, a colleague is interrupted. Your autopilot might kick in and just say, no, just be silent. You noticed it, but you're like, oh, that's fine. But with taking the stop, you can choose how do you want to act. You can come in and say, oh, I'd like to hear them finish. You can shift the way the conversation goes. And that is the power that the presence gives you. It interrupts that automatic feedback loop, and it gives you a little bit more chance to escape the regret that you might sometimes feel in situations where you always ask yourself, oh, I should have mentioned something, or I should have said something. So it helps for your well-being in preserving those moments. Now, we've all had judgments at work, and like I said, it is context specific because we all have situations that really irk us. We immediately react. But even if we fail, that is why the values part is quite important. You can never fail at your value because your value should be something that you identify that is important enough for you, but it's a value that it shouldn't really change. So if you value loyalty and family, for example, or honesty, there will be lots of times when you might be dishonest, but the value is still there, it's still the same. So it's very easy to say, oh, I failed, but let's look at the value, you try again. You can always go back to that, back to your value. And that's also why when you're looking at identifying your own values, I do recommend there's lots of work on ACT matrices and things online that help you to clarify some of the values. But your value should ideally be something that it's not a goal. It's not something that you can reach because otherwise it's just going to be a step in a chain towards something else. So the value should be something that is that unattainable end goal. Okay. Now, this one was quite short because it's really about taking that momentary pause. So I'm going to jump into the next one, which targets the values more, and it is doing what matters. So the values, like I said, it's that intangible, it's a quality like fairness, inclusion, dignity, honesty. It will be different for everyone. Your values can change over time, but it shouldn't be something that shifts all the time. And you might have different values for what you value at work and what you value at home. That is very normal. So when we're talking about teams, because I really think it is important to try and start thinking about in your own organizations, what are the steps and things that can be put in place to make these changes? Because like we've been saying throughout, it's all good and well to upskill ourselves, to do the self-care, but it does open up the door to almost sweep the problems under the rug, because if you are coping fine, it might be easy to say, oh, but actually the situation is now resolved because clearly there's no longer an issue. But that is not true. So when I'm talking about the doing what matters, I've shifted this one a bit more towards within a team setting. So if you imagine the last time you had a team meeting, if someone was filming the meeting, what would they see? Sorry. Would they see people getting equal chance to talk? Would they see that there's predictability within that team so that caregivers aren't penalized for having to do the care that is required of them? Would they see equality within the pay? Would the pay be transparent so that the team actually knows what is the pay grades for each person in the team? And would they see that harassment is actually reported, that people are actually protected, and it is taken seriously? So the WHO and ILO reminds us that these are all things to keep in mind, because you need that fix right at the source: the work design, the clarity, the predictability, and the protection. So in ACT, we use a choice point. So it's almost like whenever you're coming to choices, there's a fork in the road. You can move away or you can move towards. And this is in terms of what you value. So you might move away if you were valuing this supportive environment at work. Moving away would mean you're allowing the interruption of colleagues, you're excluding voices, you're maintaining the vague roles and avoiding the difficult conversations. And then moving towards is almost the opposite. You're rotating the opportunities to speak, predictable schedules so everyone can provide the care that their families might require without being penalized. You're transparent in what is happening within the organization, and bias can be talked about and addressed. Now, every moment does offer both of these, and it's a skill to notice and choose to move towards it. It's again that taking the moment as it comes up, giving yourself the option to choose, do you actually want to move away or do you want to move towards? Because also knowing your organization, the towards moves might not always be useful depending on the person or the group that you're interacting with. So sometimes the best decision for your own mental health and well-being would be moving away, because the moving towards is better suited for a different platform. But in your own interaction with people, that is where it really comes up more, is do you give them the opportunity to move towards what they might value? Or are you actually subconsciously or through bias pushing them to move away from what they might value? Now, our last slide is from skills to system. So we're looking at how can you get a commitment of something that is practical. And this is going to be more of a engagement with everyone, because this is individual to everyone. And I think the starting point is really that clarity of the skills aren't substitutes for policy. And we know that you have to fix the issues at the source. So with the workload, the clarity, predictable schedules, and protection. And because most importantly, for psychological safety, you need to be able to speak without fear, also knowing that it's not just going to be landing on deaf ears. So that is almost where we're going to end, because then this is where I'd like to open up discussion. So this can be for practically how you think in your organization there might be a next step to start working towards this more inclusive culture, and also just any questions about ACT and the mental health impacts.
Yes, thank you very much, Dominic. I think that was really great, and I'm sure people have really learned and appreciated a lot from your talk. Any questions for Dominic? Please feel free to raise the questions that you have in your minds. So just to initiate a bit the discussion. So you see, you may, I'm sure people have gone through this many times, that you have some young person who is working in a big project, and so because the person is young, he or she may have less powers or importance, but this person seems to be interesting, etc., hardworking. So people are interested in having the person in the team for all sorts of reasons. But if this particular person is not liked by his or her competitor, and the competitors seem to be a bit more close to the senior members, even if the senior members were very interested in this person initially, will somehow create a very, bystander kind of a situation, and also a very vague kind of situation to kind of suppress the person. And this kind of bystander effect you see a lot at every level, from senior to junior. So how do you deal with such a situation?
Yeah, it is a tricky one, because it can happen individually, because the person can perceive this relationship, and like you said, the supervisor might be interested. So the supervisor might not even be aware that this relationship is creating this void. And then that person, they can perceive it as, oh, actually, my competitor is very close, so I don't actually have that chance. So it's like the incorrect or unproven situation just gets ruminated upon, it grows, and that person almost fades away. It also happens where it is active, because there is a relationship between the other two, and they might, with that automatic bias, they might just be joking together, and then it's like, oh, but every now and then a joke might be targeted at that person, or they're complaining about something, and then it's easy to like, okay, well, let's complain about something that's from that person. Um, so it makes it very hard, because that one is almost, for the individual, it would be very hard to change that situation. Because, well, I'm especially taking it if it's, like you say, a young person coming in, because the best way for them to approach it would be to have a very honest conversation with the superior, which is very unlikely to happen, because that is very intimidating. And it's also that situation of, you can have the conversation, but what are you putting on the table? Because what is the outcome that you are hoping for? And then what is the response that you're willing to give? Because if you have a very deep conversation with a supervisor and you're saying that this is something that really bothers you, are you willing to then move to a different team, for instance, if you see, oh, but the situation hasn't changed? Because otherwise, once you've had that conversation, you can't go back. And having had that conversation, you then need to also protect yourself, because if you stay in the situation, then you're almost condoning that, okay, it's fine, they can suppress you and put you in that role. So it is very difficult. It's not something that can really be changed, at least easily, from the person experiencing it. What really should be happening is the superior should be aware of if this person's coming in, and they should be picking up on the competition between the two individuals, and then they should actually try create a little bit of distance between the one that might be perceived as being very close. Or if there is a close relationship, because that is perfectly normal, people have a lot of working relationships, be clear about it. Be clear that there is this relationship, but also by actually talking about it and making it clear that, well, there's this relationship, it also allows you to then more easily create that split between, well, this is the personal and this is the work relationship, without it looping into something that is not really manageable.
Yeah, right. So then it kind of puts a more responsibility, let's say, on the shoulders of the superior, the supervisor, right? To do the kind of
It would, but that is unfortunately that is the ideal, that you would have a supervisor that is very aware of what is going on within the team, very connected with each person's values, what they're busy doing in the team, and also how the relationship in the team is creating tension or actually allowing flourishing for different sections. And that is where I do think there's never really enough training with specific focuses on these type of things for superiors. But at the same time, superiors are so busy, it's very hard to capture them and provide these type of opportunities so they can pick up these skills. Because I mean, a lot of people, especially in astronomy, it's all researchers and scientists. Um, you never know. The person might have an interest in management and they could be a great manager, but other people, their main interest might be they really went into astronomy for the love of science and academia. So for them, that is what they care about. They're not actually too interested in managing. They just happen to end in a management position as the natural progression as their career develops.
Yeah, but one has to not to forget that astronomy is a science which is not just about a handful of efficient people doing something. It demands very expensive resources. And the resources are not always available everywhere. You need to also have certain locations where you can, put your instruments and then use those great sites, specific sites, and the resources that you bring in to do the big science that you can do. So you need to be connected with everybody. You can't just do it with the handful of people whom you favor.
No, that is
And
true.
that's where the
And that is where I think they were really spot on in the reports where they said that there's definitely a need to focus on individuals and their mental health and well-being, but you cannot separate that from the need of the organization as a whole to have a supportive and constructive environment. Because that is also, again, where if the entire organization has a supportive environment, even if the person might feel like that with that supervisor, they would have a community around them that they can access. Where often that is not the case. The person might not be sure, well, where do they go? Even if it's not necessarily to change something, but just who do they complain to or just offload some of the challenges that they're facing.
Any other questions? Maura, Alex, Iran? Monica?
I will also say for myself, I will say for myself, you guys are also welcome to reach out to me and Jen on email if questions come up later. Monica.
Right. Okay, we don't have any further questions. Genevieve, would you like to add something over here? Any thoughts that you have, any suggestions or advice that you would like to give to us?
No, just to echo what Dom has said, that obviously if you see things or you're coming across things afterwards, do just drop us a line. We're happy to explore that further and share resources that might be of use, and to just reach out. Remember it is a community, and that we, as individuals, it's hard, but as a community, we have a lot more power than we realise. So to collective action is a very useful tool in these situations.
Okay, great. John?
Yeah, I think from my side, just thank you everyone for your time. I know time is very precious. And I appreciate you all making the time and listening to what we had to share. I hope it was of benefit for you. And I look forward to see you guys in other platforms and hopefully sharing more of our work and other adventures that we engage in.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And thank you very much, Dominic and Genevieve, for your excellent talk. I think it was really good for us to think from other point of view and try to get some support, mental support in whatever you do, and feel right about what you're trying to do. And by bringing people together, it's so important. And I would like to thank all our speakers for being here and for listening and for contributing into the activities that were proposed. So if you have no further questions, then we'll stop here. We'll stop the recording now itself. And hope to see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.